Hey everyone, this is the Galaxy S26 Ultra, the best phone that Samsung has to offer here in 2026. And we're putting up against the Pixel 10 Pro XL, which to date is Google's best phone, although they are coming out with a new phone later this year. And they both have similar size main camera sensors. The S26 Ultra is 200 megapixels, while the Pixel's main sensor is 50 megapixels. The S26 Ultra has a dual telephoto system at 3 and 5x, versus the Pixel's single telephoto system at 5x, which is a similar size sensor as the 5x sensor on the S26 Ultra. And they both have similar ultra-wide cameras. The Pixel also has a wider selfie sensor at 42 megapixels versus the 12 megapixel selfie shooter on the S26 Ultra. And just a quick note about the telephoto sensors on the S26 Ultra is that they have a better minimum focusing distance, meaning you can get closer to subjects than you can with the 5x telephoto sensor on the Pixel, which is meant more of a periscope or zoom range type of a telephoto sensor. So if you like taking macro photos, you might like the flexibility that the telephoto cameras on the S26 Ultra gives you. But this is some portrait video on the S26 Ultra and what they call cinematic blur video on the Pixel. You've got this artificial background blur, so you can see what that looks like here in an indoor setting. But besides all the camera specs, all that really matters is what the cameras look like, what do the photos and videos and its quality produce. So like I always do, I'm going to show you a bunch of photos in both good and low light conditions to help you decide which of these two camera systems are best for you here in 2026. So go ahead and take a look at all the photos and videos and let me know what you think. Everyone, so here's a video test of the rear cameras of the Galaxy S26 Ultra and Pixel 10 Pro XL. As you can see, they both are actively recording from the rear facing cameras. And we are starting out with the ultra wide cameras on each at 4K 60 frames per second. And the speech enhancement is turned on the Pixel. So pay attention to the audio differences here. And I'm just going to pan around in this spot to give you a side-by-side view of these ultra wide cameras. And so a really nice bright sunny day, so we get a chance to see all the colors, greens, blues, and the reds. And so let's go ahead and move into the main camera now on the S26 Ultra and on the Pixel 10 Pro XL. So this is now the main camera on each. Again, I'll just do the same thing. I'll pan around so you get a side-by-side view of how these cameras are showing up here in the same scene. You can see how they do with the shadows in the trees and how they may adjust for the exposure as I shift back up into the sunlight here. Overall pretty good. No major shifting occurring that I can see. So we'll pan over here to the right and we'll test zoom out on that cell tower. So dual telephoto cameras on the S26 Ultra. First, the 3x telephoto there, and it also has a 5x telephoto. Likewise, the Pixel also has a 5x telephoto camera. So there's the two 5x telephotos side by side. And the S25 Ultra can go all the way up into a 25x zoom, and the Pixel can move up into a 20x zoom. So a little bit more reach on the S26 Ultra than the Pixel there. Both looking pretty steady. The S26 Ultra is looking a little bit clearer though in picture quality at this focal length. So we'll move out to the 1x here on the Samsung and on the Pixel, and we'll test autofocus here on the post with the S26 Ultra first. There you go, focus up nice and quick. And you can see the really nice shallow depth of field or natural background blur there with the wider aperture this year on the Samsung. And we'll go with the Pixel now. So really snappy autofocus with the Pixel as well. And also pretty good shallow depth of field with a slightly smaller sensor there. Now let's go ahead and walk down the stairs so I can show you the stabilization side by side. As I walk through the pathway as well, you can see all the shadows in the trees and how that's showing up here in the picture quality. And I'll just jog to try to stress out the stabilization. So there you go, just a quick video test here of the S26 Ultra and Pixel 10 Pro XL. So we're back with the rear cameras, this time in blur video on the Pixel and the portrait video on the Samsung. So again, this is the rear cameras, and with this mode turned on the Pixel, you're limited to 1080p 30 frames per second, and on Samsung you're limited to 4K 30 frames per second with this mode. So you should be seeing this artificial background blur right now, and obviously I'm outdoors. The sun is shining directly on me, so the lighting and everything should be pretty even across the board, and this effect should be looking as best as possible. And I'll just go ahead and start rotating the phone so I can show you what this looks like and how the effect holds up with the changing lighting conditions. So it's going to be a little bit more off my left, and again, a little bit of cloud cover, so the sun is not as intense, so you may not see as dramatic an effect or change. But now it's going to be more directly behind me and shining kind of more into the cameras, but there's probably some cloud cover there. And I'll pan all the way back around to where we started so you can see what this looks like here. And I'll just start walking so I can show you the stabilization as well as how this background effect holds up with some movement. So let me just think about blur video on the Pixel and portrait video here on the S26 Ultra. So this is a test of the front-facing cameras of the Galaxy S26 Ultra and Pixel 10 Pro XL. This has been recorded at 4K 60 frames per second, the max resolution and frame rates of each of these cameras. And on the Pixel, speech enhancement is not available at 60 frames per second on the front camera. And so obviously you'll see that the Pixel also has the wider field of view off the bat here. It can fit more in the frame, but it can also be adjusted, so I can move all into about a 1.4x crop is what it says. So that's what it looks like if you want a tighter framing on the Pixel. But I'll move it back out so you get the full sensor and what that looks like here. Obviously I'm outdoors and it's fairly sunny, a little bit of overcast, but the sun would be shining directly on me right now, so you can see what this looks like in this particular lighting condition. But if I start panning around, you'll see what it looks like here as the lighting starts to shift a little bit. So now it's kind of more off of my left. And again, it's not really bright and as intense as it usually is in this time of the afternoon. So the picture quality shouldn't be affected too badly, but you can see it's more kind of directly into the cameras at this point, but some of those clouds are blocking it out. And I'll keep panning all the way around till we get back to where we started. And also, if you haven't noticed, it's fairly windy, so it's a good test of these microphones as well. And let's go ahead and just start walking so I can show you the stabilization and what that looks like here side by side. So let me know what you think about the front-facing cameras here on the S26 Ultra and Pixel 10 Pro XL. Okay, so we're back with the front-facing cameras, this time with portrait video on the S26 Ultra. There is no portrait video or blurred out background here on the front-facing camera for the Pixel, only on the rear camera, but I want to show you that this is capable on the S26 Ultra, and you're limited to 4K 30 frames per second in that mode on the S26 Ultra. The Pixel is also on 4K 30, so with that I can show you the speech enhancement feature, which is available at 30 frames per second, so you can compare that on the Pixel to the audio you just heard prior to this without speech enhancement. And so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to pan around so you get a sense of how this portrait effect holds up on the S26 Ultra as the lighting conditions change. And you can also see how the picture quality looks here on the Pixel at 4K 30. So now again, the sun is more directly behind me. And if we keep panning all the way around, you can see what this looks like here now to where we started. And again, I'll just walk so I can show you the stabilization as well as how the portrait effect on the Samsung holds up with some movement. So let me know what you think about portrait video and how you feel about portrait video not being available here on the front-facing camera on the Pixel 10 Pro XL. So here's a low light video test of the rear cameras of the Galaxy S26 Ultra and Pixel 10 Pro XL. This is being shot at 4K 60 frames per second. And we're starting out with the ultra wide angle cameras on each. And so I'm just going to pan around here to give a side-by-side view of the ultra wide angle cameras, and you notice the Pixel has the wider field of view. You can fit more in the frame here. And these ultra wide angle cameras are smaller sensors, so they'll let in less light, although the Pixel's ultra wide angle camera is looking brighter, at least in the viewfinder. And this is with video boost off on the Pixel, just so you know, you can see what this looks like if I had video boost on and looked brighter. Maybe I'll try that in another clip next, right after this, with 30 frames per second, just to compare that. But we'll go to the main camera here on the Samsung. You see everything brighten up there. Same thing on the Pixel. So main cameras now, we'll just pan around to give you a side-by-side view of how that looks here in this particular setting. And we'll pan up into the trees here. You can see what that looks like. Still fairly dark. Thought it'd be a little bit brighter. But we'll go ahead and test the telephoto cameras. So the 3x telephoto here on the Samsung. And we just go straight into the 5x telephoto here on the Pixel. And we'll go to the 5x telephoto on the Samsung as well. So a little bit brighter, at least in the viewfinder, on the telephoto camera on the Pixel. But we'll move into the max 25x zoom here on the Pixel, on the S26 Ultra. And we'll go to max 20x zoom here on the Pixel. You can see what that looks like. And we'll try to back both these out on the Pixel and on the Samsung. And we'll pan around this way. And we'll just walk to test the stabilization, as well as show you what it looks like here, a little bit darker area compared to the bright lights back there through this pathway here. But as we round the corner, there's a really bright light that's on tonight. So unfortunately, it's going to get pretty bright as we round the corner. But you can see here, a little bit darker in this area, and there is that really bright light as you round the corner. So you can see how both these cameras are handling that. Looks like it's flaring a little bit out, a little bit more maybe on the Samsung, but we'll see how that's processed in the video. And here we go down this alleyway here, this strip here, being illuminated from that bright light off my right, but still fairly darker. You got a couple lights down that stretch there. And we'll pan up into the building. That does have its own lights. And we'll pan up into the night sky. You can see some clouds. And of course, there's gonna be light pollution, so you can see what it looks like here. Overall, not too bad, not too grainy, all things considered. And we'll pan back around this way. So let me know what you think about this 4K 60 frames per second low light footage. And we'll come back and we'll test out 30 frames and maybe show you some pixel boost on the Pixel. Alright, so we're back in the same scene, this time at 4K 30 frames per second. And pixel boost is on the Pixel. So things may look a little bit smoother in stabilization on the Pixel, as well as a little bit brighter. Samsung should be looking brighter as well because of the 30 frames per second. Not as dark as 60, as you can see here in the night sky. Night sky is looking a lot brighter. You can see the clouds are much more pronounced right now. And I'll just walk back this way so we can see everything in reverse from what you saw in 60 frames. But in general, everything should be looking brighter on both these phones right now. Pay attention to the stabilization. The Pixel boost may be smoothing the stabilization out more than it normally would. So let me know what you think about that. And as we get up here, we'll go back into the other lenses so you can kind of compare. Everything should be looking brighter anyway. Let's go with the ultra wide angle cameras on the Samsung and on the Pixel. So both of these looking brighter than they did at 60 frames. You can see much more definition in the sky with those clouds. Everything looking a lot brighter with these smaller sensors here. And we can even move into the 3x telephoto here on the Samsung, definitely looking brighter than it did at 60. And here we go with the 5x telephoto on the Pixel. Brighter, but maybe grainier, but maybe Pixel boost is cleaning that up in post. And 5x here on the Samsung, which again, definitely brighter than it was at 60 frames. And I'll move it all the way to 25x zoom on the Samsung and 20x zoom on the Pixel, which looks super grainy in the viewfinder right now on the Pixel, but maybe the Pixel boost is actually smoothing that out. That would be interesting. So back this out on the Pixel and on the Samsung 1x main sensor. So let me know what you think about this 30 frames per second footage compared to the 60 frames per second footage that you just saw, as well as what you think about Pixel boost here on the Pixel. So here's a low light video test of the front facing cameras of the Galaxy S26 Ultra and Pixel 10 Pro XL. This is being shot at 4K 60 frames per second, which is the max resolution and frame rate of these front facing cameras. And usually at 60 frames per second, things are a bit darker And off the bat, you'll also notice the Pixel has the wider field of view with this front-facing camera. You can fit more in the frame, so if you like wider fields of view, you want to fit more people, maybe with group selfies or anything like that, the Pixel might be a better option here. But you can punch into 1.4x to get a tighter crop if you want. So if you don't want that wider field of view, you want to shoot yourself and you want a tighter crop, you can do that with the Pixel here as well. But I'll just move it out to the full field of view so you can see that here. And as I move this way, you can see how they handle that really bright street light behind me right there. And pretty much any front-facing small sensor is going to flare that out, but overall handling it pretty well considering. And we'll just start walking and we can test the stabilization and see what that looks like here side by side, as well as move over to a bit of a darker area. And overall, I think the picture quality, at least in the viewfinder from the Pixel, is looking a little bit clearer, a little bit better colors as well. So, but that's in the viewfinder. I'm not sure what this is looking like in post. You let me know. But if I pan around this way, we can see a bunch of those streetlights and how these front-facing cameras handle them. Overall, pretty well, I think, on both. Maybe a little bit better on the Pixel. And if we come back this way, I'll show you what this looks like here side by side in this area here with less light. Again, looks a little bit more washed out on the Samsung to me in the viewfinder. Pixel's maintaining the colors, and considering that this is really more warmer, dingier light, which most cameras struggle with, especially smaller sensors like these front-facing cameras, the Pixel, at least in the viewfinder, is looking really nice. The quality of the colors and everything, and the lighting looks really good considering how little light we have right now, and that's reflected, at least what I'm seeing in the Samsung footage. But I'm gonna come back with 4K 30 frames per second footage, as well as wrap this up with my final thoughts here on the comparison. All right, so we're back with the front-facing cameras, this time at 4K 30 frames per second, so everything's looking brighter, especially on the Samsung. And look, the colors are looking a lot better in the viewfinder on the Samsung as well. I'll do the same thing. I'll just move over here so you can see how they handle the bright light. It's gonna look brighter at 30 frames per second, especially a little bit more flare out here on the Samsung because of that. But the Pixel is maintaining the color quality that I saw at 60 frames per second. The lighting is looking a little bit more balanced to me. But let me know what you think here. I'll do the same thing. I'll just walk so you can see the stabilization, as well as compare the lighting as I move through these areas compared to what you saw at 60 frames per second. And right after this, I'll kind of give you my final thoughts here. But we'll do the same thing and pan all the way around. You can see the bright lights behind me, and of course, flaring them out a lot more here at 30 frames per second because everything's a little bit brighter, a little bit more so on the Samsung again. And if you come back to this area that's more dimly lit, you'll see that Samsung is much brighter this time around. Much brighter, much better colors from the Samsung here at 30 frames per second, at least. Again, I'm just basing this off the viewfinder. Things could have looked different once the video's been processed and you're seeing it at this point. But let me know what you think about the camera comparison. Drop me a comment with your thoughts. But for me, what I personally think is that, you know, I haven't tested a Pixel camera in a while. And while they're always known, and you always hear the comment, Pixel's great for photography, not so much for video. I always thought the Pixels kind of had dropped off on their camera innovation after Mark Lavoie left the company, maybe around 2020, I believe. But you know, I think Pixel still maintains pretty good photography. I think, like people say, the colors are still fairly natural to me compared to the Samsung. And of course, on the Samsung, you have some advantage here as far as dual telephoto cameras versus the single telephoto on the Pixel. You have a better minimum focusing distance with those telephoto cameras on the Samsung, meaning you can get closer to subjects, take better macro photos with those telephoto sensors. Compared to the Pixel, you can't get as close with its 5x telephoto. It's meant for more long-range periscope zoom. And that's a little more flexibility there on the telephoto cameras on the Samsung. And also you have log video built in, along with the APV codec on the Samsung. You can access log video on the Pixel. You're just gonna have to use a third-party app. So a little bit more flexibility there, again, for pro users on the Samsung. But again, Pixel's always been known for point and shoot anyway, so I still think that holds. I think if you're more point and shoot, I think you're gonna like the results of the Pixel. I think video, honestly though, on the Pixel has been improved. I said that even last year on the 9 Pro XL and 9 Pro. I thought the video was pretty good on the last year, and with Pixel Boost, it's even better. Let me know your thoughts on Pixel Boost if you think that's cheating. Personally, I don't think so. It's a feature offered on the phone, and yes, the processing is done in the cloud, but it is a feature that you can turn on and use on your phone if you're willing to wait for that processing. So I think it's actually a nice feature. I wish, of course, Google would put that onboard processing so you wouldn't have to wait. And again, probably a reflection of the power maybe of the Tensor chip. But let me know your thoughts on Pixel Boost. I think it improves the quality, improves the stabilization. Maybe a little bit too bright sometimes, but overall I think it's a nice feature, and I think it really helps bring up and level up their video quality which most people probably ding Pixel for still. I think narrative is still great for photos, not so good for video. I do think that their photos have gotten stagnant. They're about the same quality that they were years ago. And I think the video has improved incrementally to the point where it's a lot better than people give it credit for. But overall, I think if you're more of a pro user, you find more flexibility on the Samsung, and that's where I would lean towards. If you wanted more flexibility, you're more pro user, you like those pro user features, Samsung will have you better covered there. So those are just my quick thoughts on the two camera systems and my time using them. Let me know what you personally thought with a comment down below. If you have any other questions, also leave that in the comment section. I'll try to answer what I can. And as always, thanks for watching.